Republican Seniors of Minnesota. We bring seniors 50 plus together.
Learn about and discuss issues that are important to Minnesotans. Hear from our elected officials and experts on public policy.
Meet political candidates, elect delegates to district and state conventions, and help elect Republicans to office at all levels.
We believe in and advocate for the principles of personal responsibility, economic prosperity, peace through strong national defense,
and limited, sensible government. Republican Seniors of Minnesota. Thanks for joining us.
In today's meeting, our first speaker is Qasim Mohammed, who is co-chair of one of our affiliates, African Republicans. Qasim will talk about their group's goals and activities. Then, Barb Sutter, RNC National Committee Woman for Minnesota, will share with us what the RNC is doing on a national level with coalitions, the national term for affiliates, and what the affiliate goals are in Minnesota as we move forward. Today's featured speaker is St. Thomas University Professor Emeritus of Engineering, Fred Zimmerman, who will talk about 2 technological innovations that are or will change our world.
One-minute warning, please find a seat. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Carol Brumwell. I'm chair of the Republican Seniors of Minnesota and your MC for this meeting. Please silence your cell phone, turn it off. And I want to be sure everyone understands that this meeting is being live streamed today. So welcome to anyone who is here on live stream. It is also being recorded by volunteer Brad Nolte, assisted by Patty Pietz. And we're using equipment rented from Minnesota Star Live. If you have a question or comment during the event, please let us bring you a microphone so everyone can hear your comment here as well as on the recording. The area closest to the beverage table, I don't see people in those last 2 chairs next to the beverage table, that area is off camera. If someone is seated there and is given the microphone, we ask that they move towards the center so people can see you as well as hear you. Placing God before country, would you please join me in an opening prayer? Gracious God, we thank you for this opportunity to gather for a meeting. We thank you for each and every one who is here today. Please bless our speakers this day. Help them to communicate clearly the wisdom they have to share. We pray for those in government office. Give them courage during these divisive times to do what is right. Help them make laws to protect our freedoms so that we can live peaceful, quiet lives in godliness and dignity. Help righteous judges balance justice and mercy and judge in accordance with the laws of the land. Please be with each of us. Help us to see in all others the gifts they are employing to carry out your will. Amen. We'd like to acknowledge our military veterans, active or retired police officers, and first responders. Will those people please stand? Now, will everyone stand, please, and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you, and be seated. As we announced in the formal call that was sent out June 30th, we'll now have a brief business meeting, and we're going to approve revisions to our Republican Seniors Constitution. So, I call this special meeting of the Republican Seniors of Minnesota to order. I note that we have a quorum of paid-up members. There's one item of business, and that's approving the revisions to the Constitution for Republican Seniors of Minnesota. Approval requires the yes vote of 2/3 of the members present at this meeting. Only paid-up members are eligible to vote. Copies of the changes were distributed in the call, and printed copies were available as you entered the room. They're also, I don't know, were they distributed on the tables as well? The board reviewed these changes and recommends approval. May I have a motion to approve the revisions to our Constitution? Thank you, Bob. May I have a second? Thank you, Elaine. Is there discussion? All in favor of approving the revisions to our Constitution say yes. Yes. Opposed, no. Thank you, the motion passes. May I have a motion to adjourn this special session? Thank you, Barb. All in favor say yes. Yes. Adjourned. That was quick and easy. I have 4 housekeeping announcements. The State Fair is a little more than a month away. The State Fair Seniors Day is August 28th. We need 12 people during the day to staff the Republican booth. I have sign-up sheets, and I'm just going to send them around, one for each side. If you're willing to sign up to volunteer in the booth, please do so. Pen got away from me there. Note that the shift times vary a little bit from what was on the old sign-up sheet. We now start our shift at 8:30 to 12:30 is the morning shift. 12:30 to 3:30, 4:30 is the mid-afternoon shift, and then 4:30 to 8:30 is the evening shift. Announcement number 2. How many of you knew that we have a Republican Seniors Library? Show of hands. Oh, you did not know that we have a library. David Morissette has been our librarian for the last 5 years. Someone preceded him. He is hoping that someone will take over from him. But in order for that to happen, we need about 3 or 4 people to serve on a library review committee to look at the books we have. And David, your last count was 200?
Estimate we have approximately 200.
About 200 books. So David would chair this committee of 3 or 4 people, call a time for you guys to get together, look at the books, decide what we want to keep, get an inventory of those books we want to keep, and then we can talk about next steps. So I have a sign-up sheet here at the front. There is also one on the back table. Either place, sign up. We'd love to have 3 people meeting here the rest of July and into August. Kind of time frame should not be a major time commitment. And once it's done, then we can move forward. So thank you, David, for volunteering for our librarian. As I mentioned at the start of the meeting, new this month, we are live streaming our meetings as well as making recordings available. That means you can choose to attend from home if weather or illness make you miss a meeting. You can invite others from outside the metro area, particularly outstate Minnesota. We would love to have more people hearing our great speakers, our timely speakers who have information that is well worth sharing. The meeting video will be available in about a week. The video links are on our website. You can also just go straight to YouTube. We've got handouts on each table about how to watch the videos using YouTube. You can use the smart TV features as well. Item 4, Center of American Experiment is doing a series of meetings that they're calling Off the Cliff, Minnesota's legislative nosedive and the climb back to sanity. They have meetings in many of the cities around the metro area. Please go to their website and find a meeting close to you. I'm trying to think when the Eden Prairie one is July 27th. So that's the one I'm planning to attend. The Lakeville one is tomorrow, July 12th. Do we have guests or first-time visitors? We'd like you to introduce yourself if you're comfortable doing that. Give us your name and your city. Raise a hand. Karen?
Susan Baker, first time here, and I'm from Bloomington.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome. Other guests or first-time attendees?
Diana Wyman from Bloomington.
Thank you, Diana. Anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? Wonderful to have new people join us. Remember that you are our best advertisers of the fact that we have a Republican Seniors Group. There should be cards and membership brochures that you can hand out to other people. Distribute those and invite them to come with you next time. Our first speaker is Barb Sutter, and she is the RNC National Committee woman for Minnesota who will share with us what the RNC is doing on a national level with what they call coalitions, that's what we call affiliates here in Minnesota, as well as what the affiliate goals are in Minnesota as we move forward in this next year. Barb?
Good morning. I'm going to take a picture of this group first. So it's quite the scene to look out at. It's like being at a convention. Let's see if I can do this. There you go. All of you. Everybody wave at Barb.
Not always quite sure. And now it's telling me to hold your camera upright. Try this again. Okay, that appears to be working. The arrow's moving, so something must be happening.
To the FBI now?
No, you have a truck out there taking care of that. I'm teasing. I understand there are some concerns by some people, but I don't think there need to be. But anyway, good morning. I am very pleased to be here and see so many familiar faces. I've said to a couple of people, I frequently intend on Tuesdays to come to this meeting, and then something invariably comes up and I'm not able to. So I'm really happy to be here today, not only speaking to you, but also to the people that I hear now are watching us live. So I'm also really pleased to be working with the affiliates again. For those of you that go back with me in time involved in the party, while I served as your MNGOP secretary for almost 4 years, I also worked with our affiliates. And for me, I have always believed that they're not only important for our state, but I think you all make a difference. And I firmly believe we can make a difference in our elections. But the proviso there is if our party supports them. And this chair, I will say, does, as well as the team working with him, and that's what's really critical. So today I want to share with you what's happening at a national level, promoted and prompted by the RNC, whereas Carol indicated the affiliates are referred to as coalitions. We now have in Minnesota, as opposed to just having a director of affiliates, which as I said I used to do, we have a team of 3 of us, not because you're too hard to handle, but it can be a big job, and especially if it's done right and well, and we really want to take the time and make this a success. State Secretary Jenna Dix, CD5 Chair Alec Beck, and I are working with our affiliate groups. And to demonstrate the seriousness with which we now take this new look at our affiliates and working with you, and at my urging and with Chair Hand's support, what we've brought back, and I think Carol may already be familiar with this, is your participation by a representative at the state executive committee meetings. So we've taken a page out of what used to be in Keith Downey's book and having an affiliate representative at our meetings. It's done on a rotating basis, and one member of affiliates comes to our meeting, they hear what's going on in the state firsthand and share their thoughts of what makes the affiliates work, or they raise questions on behalf of all of the affiliates. We're trying to also get communication going between the various groups. As affiliates, you probably also are aware you have access to all of the state data and the RNC data. So in other words, the affiliates are considered a complete political unit as a CD or a Senate district is. And the other thing I guess I'd like to get out of the way, while we as conservatives, we say we don't believe in identity politics, we have been accused of that, though, for having affiliates. There are people that think they should not exist. But I will tell you that my argument has always been, and for a lot of people, it is a start to getting involved for those that haven't been involved. And a really good example of that is our Asian American group. Initially, they preferred to meet within their own community. By doing that, however, they very quickly learned that they had access to our legislators, and they found themselves becoming so involved in various issues that they then moved on to their Senate districts. And quite frankly, they probably would never have done that if they hadn't initially come together as a group within their community. So the goal should always be to move on from affiliates, not move out, but move on to be a member in your Senate district, be a voice and a force there too. But of course, never forget that you're a part of an important group and the impact that you have as seniors. And on that note, I've been friends with Priya Samsundar for a long time. Just happened to talk to her yesterday. She sends her greetings and she extols her virtues of your help with her and her K2 group, and thus you are impacting political causes within our state. And by the same token, I will say as MNGOP, once we have established candidates as we head into our elections next year, or indeed city council or school board, we may turn to some of the best writers and articulate folks in our state, and yes, that would be you, to help with letters to the editor. The other thing that we're moving into, and I understand you may be working on that to a degree next month, is bank your vote, protect your vote, and a group like you can be critical in that endeavor. Things like seniors, registering seniors is probably better than anyone else being out there trying to register seniors, and making sure those absentee ballots get sent in. Never again should we have a situation like we had in our last election. And this has been documented in numbers. Ryan Wilson and Jim Schultz could have won their races had the absentee ballots been sent in that were requested, and I'm sad to say, by Republicans. That's how close they were. So it's a problem, and that's why there is this push now to get these absentee ballots in and get them in early. But again, those votes also have to be protected. So if I haven't made clear to you that your role can be critical in our state, let me talk to you about our coalitions on a national level. Now, I have a lot I could share with you about the RNC, as you can imagine. One of the most often heard statements I get is, the RNC doesn't do a thing, Barb. What in the world do they do? Well, I have to tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. I'm actually really happy to be here to be able to share with you what a difference the coalitions have made nationally, and again, what I think we could do in Minnesota as well. As a member of our grassroots committee, I have been privileged to watch and participate in this transition nationwide. The RNC made coalitions a priority. That actually began under President Trump. You can all remember the significant gains that were made by the various minority groups in that election in 2016, and despite his loss, again in 2020. And what the RNC learned from the president was that we needed to broaden our base. We had to make those contacts ongoing, lasting, and they had to be meaningful. And that is something we have to strive for in Minnesota as well. The RNC did that by opening community centers all across the country. They continued that on into the 2020 election, and it continues on through the present day. We just had another office open last week in Texas. And they generally make a big splash about it. For those of you on social media, it was all over social media last week. It's a multi-million-dollar effort, and it has seen a real difference in votes in key states where we've needed them across the country. We have meanwhile grown, pushing towards 50 centers nationwide, and we work within the Hispanic, the Asian Pacific, the Black, the Native American, the Jewish, the veteran and military communities, and the RNC women. The thing about these centers that I think is different and what makes them work is they're not merely meant to gather votes or for people to show up during election season. They become permanent centers of outreach. And early investments in these communities means that we take our messages into the community, focus on meeting new voters, and growing our party. And again, the key is it cannot just be done at election time, which I will say we are guilty of here too. We go into the cities in September, October. That's too late. You have to build relationships with people. Sorry, I'm having a lot of Marco Rubio moments. So while traditional activities are maintained in these centers, such as training, they also promote non-traditional activities. And as I said, the investments are year-round. They include meetings, English lessons, citizenship trainings, and then I will tell you that groups from the RNC very proudly go to the swearing-ins of citizens. A variety of classes, a place where moms can come and read to their kids, as well as meet and organize, and that's what happened last year, and they organized against what was going on in their schools. So those type of activities are the activities that establish long-term relationships. One staffer from the RNC is assigned to each one of these centers, but it is run by community volunteers. They run the programs, they establish them, and that's again what makes these centers and the people there very relatable. So when made a priority, this has moved the needle in every election cycle since they've existed. In areas where they exist, again, they have seen there are measurable statistics directly relating to the location and the circumference around them and the difference that it's made. Compared to the gains in 2016, the gains made in 2018 in the midterms, and the 2020 results, Hispanic and Asian results and support for the GOP in 2020 jumped another 10 points and another 17 points respectively, and that's above and beyond what they had already jumped in 2016. Black voters shifted another 4 points to the right in 2020 after shifting 11 points in 2016 under President Trump. In Florida, for the first time, Republicans won a majority of the Hispanic vote in the state's history. It was first. And there are quite a few of the centers down in Florida. Again, they target the key states where they know they'll make a difference. And there are many well-known names. I could give you a list, but there are many well-known elected House members that directly attribute their wins to the community center's presence. So we need to strengthen our outreach across the board, however. Targeted outreach, a message that appeals to women, which we hear a lot about here in our state, veterans, and voters of faith. In Minnesota, as I always like to point out, we will likely not win the metro areas. We can be honest about that. But what we have to do is become a presence, because all we really have to do is move the needle. Sometimes 2 to 5 percentage points in a race can make a difference. As far as the RNC goes, it's not just minority communities, by the way. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our RNC faith group and the possibility of translating that into a similar effort here in our state. If you look at faith itself, even coming from various corners, that would be the largest affiliate group we would have, and indeed it does make up the RNC's largest and very active affiliate group. Finally, we're making a strong move to harness the youth vote. Various new positions have been hired at the RNC, focusing on college campuses, high schools, youth-focused rallies across the country. We recognize that as a party, we need to be engaging younger voters earlier, more often, and in different ways than we ever have before. Many of you have probably heard that the Democrats are now registering young people at age 16, telling them they can't vote, if we believe that, but also suggesting that they will then, of course, grab them at age 18. So it's not playing copycat, but we have to engage young voters earlier. So that's that's my presentation, just to give you an idea of what's going on nationally. Just as an addendum, and I'm sorry Kasim isn't here today, who represents the African American group here in Minnesota. Many of you probably are aware that in Minneapolis, the Republican Party did open a Somali American community center last, I think it was late September, October. Again, far too late. But It is in its early stages. It is right now temporarily closed. These things have to be funded, but we hope to eventually make that a source for information, again, build relationships, and work together to strengthen communities in the metro. The same would apply to other, that I call forgotten groups in our cities, and right now I know that there's a Black African American group getting started. So that's what I have for you today. In addition, I'm very fortunate. I have been elected to or serve on 6 different committees at the RNC. I have cards with me. I will leave cards. I'm staying for the whole meeting. Happy to answer any questions, discuss anything else. I work on our Rules Committee. I was elected to our Budget Committee. There were a lot of questions about budget when the RNC election happened. I'm happy to clear some of those very unfortunate misconceptions up. Again, I'm on grassroots, and I'm now working on our convention arrangements for next August. As you know, we'll have the National Convention in Milwaukee in July of next year. So happy to answer questions, but thank you so much for having me here. And Carol, thank you for letting me run over time.
Thank you so much, Barb. As she said, she'll be at the back of the room to answer questions so that we can move on with the rest of our program. I better get my list here because Dr. Zimmerman has quite the resume. I want to be sure that you hear his background. Our featured speaker today is Dr. Fred Zimmerman. Dr. Zimmerman retired as a professor of engineering and management at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul and currently holds the rank of Professor Emeritus. During his 25-year association with the University of St. Thomas, Dr. Zimmerman served as Engineering Program Director, Engineering Department Chair, member of the Committee of Deans, and full professor. When he retired at the end of 2005, he was awarded the university's highest academic award, the University of St. Thomas Distinguished Service Award. For many years, Dr. Zimmerman taught both engineering and management classes, mostly at the graduate level. He's also taught at the University Católica in Montevideo, Uruguay, and at the Czech Management Center in Czech Republic, the University of Pittsburgh, and the University of Minnesota. He's frequently a source to the media on industrial issues. He's the author of numerous professional and technical articles, plus the McGraw-Hill book entitled The Turnaround Experience, Real-World Lessons in Revitalizing Corporations. That's a mouthful. Before 1985, when he returned to academia, Dr. Zimmerman spent more than 25 years in industry as an engineer, manager, vice president, and president. He worked primarily for 3 computer companies, IBM, Control Data, and National Computer Systems. You recognize those names, I'm sure. He served on the boards of directors or advisors of 16 corporations. Dr. Zimmerman lives in Minnetonka with his wife, Jonelle. The Zimmermans have 5 children and have housed more than 90 foster children. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fred Zimmerman. Brief pause here while we get his slides up and his microphone on. Thank you.
Okay, how about now? Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, thank you, folks. And when Don Patton and Steve Anderson approached me about this gig, then they asked me to talk about some of the emerging technologies, and I am willing to do that. I do have some information on a few of them. But I thought it might be kind of useful for us to look at what might drive the technology and what might be necessary for us to have a prosperous economy. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Here's what we need to have in order to have a successful economy. We need to have materials. We're very short of materials, and I'll go into a little of the detail. And much of the technology that we need to develop is dependent on certain high-grade materials. And we also have to have some people. We have to have some well-educated people, but we need lots of workers. We're quite short of workers. And one of my colleagues at St. Thomas said, if we ever enforce immigration, all of our roofs will leak. Now, I think that we do need a lot of workers. I'm going to talk about that. We also need competitive companies, because we used to have 7,000 big companies in the United States. Now we have maybe about a little over 3,000. So we've lost a lot of companies. Companies like International Harvester, for instance, was at one time the 4th largest company in the United States. And it went in the 1980s, which was kind of a tough time for manufacturing. They went from 103,000 employees to 15,000. That's a big drop. They closed something like 47 manufacturing plants. And there's other stories. Even companies like Boeing, which was so important, they made some mistakes. They bought a lot of their stock back, something in the neighborhood of $40 or $50 billion worth of stock. That depleted their cash, and they're operating at a very substantial deficit. They have quite substantial negative net worth. And then we have had some prudent investments, but we've had a lot of frivolous investments. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. Minerals are going to be crucially important to the welfare of individual countries and to our overall economy, and there we are not doing very well. Now, here's some of the key materials, and some of them are alloys to high-grade steel. Some are involved with electric cars, vehicles. There's a lot of these that are quite important, and there's the price per metric ton. So if you want to buy a ton of molybdenum, it's $56,000. And chromium is $12,000, and vanadium is $28,000. All of those are very key to what we're doing. Titanium, $36,000 a ton. In pounds, titanium is usually around $20 a pound. Now it's about 17, but there's a lot of fluctuation in those. So these are valuable things. Now, so the question that we have is, which of these materials and minerals are scarce, and which ones must be imported, and where could we have substitutes? And I'm a great believer in what we do with substitutes. Now here's a list of 50 critical minerals. This was prepared by the United States Economic Security people. And the little, the middle number there, the 11%, 13%, that's the percentage that we are now importing. So we still have some, but that's only a part of the list. Here's the next list. And you can see there they go from 75 to 100% that importing. And here's another list. So the vast majority of the minerals that we need to make things like good steel or military products or medical devices or lots of other things are actually all coming from overseas. And it puts us in kind of a weak position. Here, this slide, I'm not too sure about this slide. It's only an approximation, but it's one way of thinking about where we stand on materials. This is phosphorus and aluminum. We've got hundreds of years of supply left in the world. But chromium, about 40 years at our current rate. Now, the rate is changing because we're going to be using more of all these things. Zinc, 34 years. So tin, 13 years, or 17 years. So there's a general worldwide shortage of materials. Now, and these are some examples of where these materials are essential. That bottom one on the top graph there, the conventional car, it uses mainly steel and copper. An electric car uses steel and copper and lithium and nickel and cobalt and all kinds of things. And none of that stuff comes from here. Hardly any of it comes from here. Now, and then we might think of, like windmills and that sort of thing. It's good to look into that, but they also use a lot of these critical materials. And so there's other, perhaps, interesting climate considerations, too, in some of these things. I'm not going to get into that. But one of the things that is clear is that the need for materials is greatly accelerating worldwide. Everybody is going to try to get into this act of mechanizing their economy, making it stronger. And so the prosperity is heretofore been largely limited to the United States and Europe, Western Europe. Okay. All right. Let me see if I can put this in a better place. Is that better? Okay. All right. I'm sorry for that. But anyway, graphite, nickel, lithium, cobalt, manganese, silicon, zinc, these are all very important things, and rare earths, which everyone here has got some rare earth that they're using, because cell phones need rare earth and a lot of the electronic devices. So, now here's an interesting graph. This happens to be in German, but that's all right. I have a lot of relatives. But the left column is where the stuff is mined. But that's only part of it. Where is it processed, and where does the distribution take place? And you can see that they're mined in places like Russia and Australia and Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo is knee-deep in all kinds of precious minerals. And so on and so forth. There's cobalt, lithium, nickel, and rare earth. But look where they're processed. Much of them are processed. Is it, this thing is cutting out, I think, but let me know, just let me know if this thing is haywire, will you? But anyway, much of that is processed in China. And China is working to control the distribution of these key materials. Carbide is a good example. It's essential for modern machine tools. It's okay, all right. But so that's considering. Here is, these are rare earths. These are especially important to modern devices. And this is a graph. It happens to be another one in German. But it shows the essential reserves, that each little square is proportionate to the reserves that exist. So there's a lot of reserves in China, in Brazil, in Russia, India, some in Australia, some in the rest of the world, much of it in Africa. And then there's the reserves that are in the United States. Here's an interesting graph. Here's what, if we have a new American born, here's what they use. 55,000 pounds of cement, 252,000 pounds of coal, 1,000 pounds of copper, gold, iron ore, lead, phosphate, lithium, zinc. They eat a lot of stuff. And we're not, and of course, the rest of the world is seeing on television the standard of living that we have here, and they like the idea of having that standard of living. I've taught a couple of times, several times, 5 times overseas, and more times overseas when I was doing real work before I became a professor. But this is the periodic table, and everything in red is in critical shortage. The things that are in orange and yellow, they're also short. And that bottom one there, the rare earths, we're really in deep weeds there. Now, so we have 2 choices. We need to either be in a better position on materials or get poorer. We're not going to have something in the middle. We either have to have more access to critical materials or get poorer. You take steel, for instance. You know, if you want alloy steel, you don't just need iron ore. You don't just need iron ore. Do you want me to use another one there, Barb? Or Carol? I'm sorry. Yeah. Why don't we call this a day? There you go. And then, can you hear me? Okay. You take steel. You know, we used to, we lived in Pittsburgh for a year when our son was in the transplant hospital there. There used to be 271 steel plants in just the Pittsburgh area. There's 1 left, and it makes pipe. Now, if you want to make good steel, you need not just iron ore, you need manganese, and you need vanadium, and you need molybdenum. And otherwise, it's cheap stuff. So, you know, there's...
Right to your mouth.
Right there, okay, all right. You need, let's see here. Now there is some hope. Some of the aircraft companies, Lockheed Martin in particular, they've done a lot of what you can do with other materials to make airplanes. And there's certain kinds of plastics, there's certain kinds of ceramic materials. And so there's a lot of parts in planes now that are not some of these rare minerals. So there is some hope, but we do have to get cracking. Now another problem that we need to worry about is, do we have people? Not only the numbers of people, but the skills of the people. Where are they? So here's a graph of the projected world population. The dark green one is North America. We have now about 8.2 billion people in the world. We're going to have about 10 billion, a little more, 10 and a half, 11 billion, something like that. Look at Asia and look at Africa. There's a lot of changes there. Now, I think we all know that China and India are really big countries from the standpoint of population. Do you know what company is projected to be the 3rd largest country in the world, or actually the 2nd largest country in the world in 2100? What is it? Nigeria. Nigeria is supposed to have something like 780 million people by 2100. So there's lots of changes. This is how it looks. China has got because of their one-party policy, one-child policy, they're going to slip a little bit. Nigeria is going to be the second largest. India will continue to be big. And then you get down to some of these countries that we know more about, and many of our forebears came from there, like Germany and the UK, and some of those are going to be pretty minor companies from the standpoint of population. Here's something we did at St. Thomas. This is kind of an interesting. We're not very complicated people, but we look at the rocking chair ratio. The percentage of people in a country that are 65 or older in comparison to those that are under 20. And, so we have about 73% as many people over 65 or over as we have under 20. China has 63%. Nigeria has 5.5%. Russia has 70.5%. Germany has 122%. And Angela Merkel, when she was Chancellor of Germany, she raised the question, if we don't have immigrants, who's going to pay for the retirements? So, and France is not quite the same as Germany. Mexico is 26%. So there's these big variations. And there's a graph showing the difference. So, but then we have another problem. And what is our employment profile like? Where are people working? And when I was growing up, something like 36% of the country was employed in manufacturing. That included the secretaries and the accountants and the managers and everybody who worked for manufacturing companies. And that figure has declined. And this tangible production, by the way, includes three things. Sometimes it's called goods producing classifications that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the way they keep things. It's really only three industries: mining, manufacturing, and construction. And that used to be more than 40% of our employment. Now it's somewhere around 11%. But there's, this is another, and then we end up importing a lot because we are unable to produce it, in part because we don't have very many people engaged in production. So we are running up these big deficits. Now then, here was the employment profile in 1939. We had about something in the neighborhood of 11 million people that were involved in goods producing, and some in trade and transportation and utilities, very essential services. And then we had about 12 million, a little over 12 million people in finance, insurance, real estate, services, and industry, and government, I'm sorry. Now, there's nothing wrong with those professions. They're important too. But we have a lot of people in them. Twice as many people in that line of work as Germany has as a percentage. By 1969, it had changed some. But it was kind of like it was, a few more people in finance, insurance, real estate services, and education, where I worked for the last half of my working career. So that's where a lot of the people are, is in either healthcare or in education. Those are big numbers. Also in what I call gross national frivolity. That's gambling and restaurants and that sort of thing. But anyway, here it is in 2000. And here it is in 2013. And I don't know what it is now, but it's worse, I'm sure. So that has questions. Now, that doesn't mean that You know, some of my best friends are lawyers or bankers or, you know, these are important jobs, but we have a lot of people in that. And we have relatively few people actually making things that we're going to need. Now, and then we got to also look at the quality of the people and what they know. These are the international rankings on test scores in math and science. There's the United States, and we have countries above us like Slavonia and the Slovak Republic, the Czech Republic, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea. And then the next one is science. These are conducted for 2 grades, the 4th grade and then the 8th grade. And then we're a little better off in science, but we're still quite a ways away. One way of looking at this is on these internationally normed tests, the students that would rate at the 50th percentile in the United States would rank at the 13th percentile in Singapore. And the students in Singapore that would rate at the 50th percentile there would rate at the 87th percentile in the United States. So we're behind in education, and we do need to get it fixed. So here's research and development expenditures. And in 2017, in Southeast Asia, the United States, the European Union, and the rest of the world. So some people say the Chinese are stealing our technology. I think there's probably some truth to that. It's probably also true. We did the same thing to the French and the British in about 1905. But anyway, look where the people are investing in better technologies. So here's who's gaining in R&D. We have some very good research going on. The University of Minnesota is doing some good things. There's other schools besides. We have one of our sons is a professor at UCLA, and another daughter is a professor at the University of North Carolina, and then another daughter taught German in Ohio State. She didn't have to learn it. She knew it from her family. But anyway, there's a lot of research going on. We're not at square one, but we're not where we need to be. And neither is Europe, really. But look at South Korea, what they're doing. And Japan. Here's where the college graduates are coming from. Russia has a lot of college graduates. And they are very good at math, the ones from Georgia, in that area, Yerevan, their institute. So there's a lot of good knowledge that is happening from overseas. Here is the patents. Who's filing the patents? In computer tech, you can see those. It's a kind of pie chart, but there are so many countries that it's a little hard to read. But China, Japan, South Korea, they're also doing a lot. Machine tools. You know, Greg Buck is a great friend of mine. He's the owner of Productivity, the largest machine tool distributor in this part of the United States. Probably one of the top 5 or 10 in the country. Their leading brand is made in the United States. The Haas machine family, which is made in Oxnard, California. But almost everything else is imported, mostly from Japan, sometimes from Turkey. So there's a lot of technology that is going on in other places. And so, you know, in terms of people, we do need some well-rounded scientists and some enterprising engineers. We're pretty good in that regard. We still have some very competitive companies like Deere, for instance. My wife and I were in Portugal a little while back, and we looked out in the field. They were plowing with the John Deere tractor. no no red tractors, but a lot of green tractors. So we have some good companies. We need to treat them fairly. Practicing teachers, practical teachers. We have a lot of people in education in colleges who have never worked anyplace. And that is not a good thing. And I think St. Thomas, we were lucky because when we started the engineering program, we didn't have any money. And so what we had to do is we had to get retirees out of 3M and Honeywell and DuPont and General Mills and a lot of places. And at one time in our department, and these were all people that had retired from key positions, we had one guy who was the director of research at DuPont. One guy was head of manufacturing at Honeywell. One was vice president, actually two of them were vice presidents of 3M. One guy was head of quality of Honeywell. And those are the people that built that program. They attracted the students, and the students liked them because they knew what they were doing. So, you know, we need to kind of take a good hard look at education. Because, you know, we've been paying for, you know, everybody knows about the current student debt. And the students, have, you know, and the parents, they've been paying for crepe Suzette, and we've been getting the cube root of chicken salad. You know, we need to have much better education than what we have. And we need successful farmers. We have quite a few. We're in good shape on agriculture generally, if the climate doesn't create some problems for us. And then we do need more high quality business people, not hedge fund operators, but people who can run companies wisely, like Deere does, or a number of companies here in Minnesota. 3M used to be in that category, but they have so many lawsuits. I'm kind of worried about 3M. So, and creative problem solvers. You know, I was involved in the early computer business. I started with IBM in 1955. And I worked a little bit, I was very junior, on the first IBM computer in Minnesota. And it was kind of interesting to me where the technology came from. It didn't come from MIT or Harvard. You know, a lot of it was homegrown stuff. The same is true of the Mayo Clinic. Most of the notoriety that emerged from the Mayo Clinic was with people that grew up about 15 or 20 miles from Rochester. These were people that could simply make things work. And that's where we need to rethink some of things, and we need lots more workers. At Control Data, we had a guy named Orv Berg. I don't know what kind of an education he had. But what he did, he was in the parts department. And we had systems in India and Europe and all over the world almost. Control Data was the unabashed technical leader in that industry for quite a few years. And what Orv did, he would send out whatever anybody was needed. And one guy, he got a telex or Twix or something from one of the field engineers in France and said, you know, send me some nuts and bolts because it's all metric over here. I can't go buy these things and the stuff's coming apart. You know? And so a couple of days later, he gets a Federal Express shipment of a coffee can full of bolts. Now, that's the kind of people we should not forget. And every company has people like that. You know, they don't necessarily have to be people that graduated from Harvard. They need the people who will ship the parts. And so we need to kind of focus on that. We're going to need these. You know, I have a lot of friends in manufacturing because that was my main beat at St. Thomas. And one of them said, you know, I like these Mexicans because they have alarm clocks. You know, So we need a lot of people who will do what needs to be done. Now then, where do we stand on companies? Are they the right companies to ensure prosperity for our country? And are they prosperous, and are they going to be able to weather downturns? Because once in a while, it's going to rain. And are some more likely to be future drains on our prosperity? Well, here's some things. We got a lot of big companies, and our stock market has been very healthy, as long as we don't lose our position as the main world currency. I don't think we will right away, but I mean, it's something we should think about. But China has some big companies too. Here's some of the world's largest companies. The ones that are in green are from the United States. And the Walmart's up there. Then there's ExxonMobil, Apple, Berkshire Hathaway. It was a very well-run company in my view. You know, there's some of the rest of them are not that strong. Boeing is a good example. But look at the emerging companies in places like China and in Africa and some of these other places. Here's the world's largest steel manufacturers. And if you go down to, let's see, here's the United States, is that gray one. And we used to have a lot of good steel companies. We now have now basically 4 companies. One is European-owned, Arcelor. And we have U.S. Steel, which you'd ask a lot of people which is our biggest steel company, and a lot of people would say U.S. Steel. In reality, it's Nucor. And that's a relatively recent company in a certain sense. Steel Dynamics is much like it. Steel Dynamics was formed out of Nucor. They're the 2 biggest in terms of production, and they are by far the more efficient. And here, that right graph shows their profits, their return on assets. Nucor is 26%, Steel Dynamics is 28%, U.S. Steel is 15%, and Arcelor is 10%. And what we had, our youngest son was battling cancer. We took him one time to the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. We were coming back, and we were going through Butler, Indiana, and I talked my wife into going through a steel mill. Our young son went with too. And at that time, this was a Steel Dynamics mill. They were making steel for 0.37 man-hours per ton, 0.37. Not too far away in Ohio, there was an LTV mill. The old Jones and Laughlin combination. They were making steel at 3.4 man-hours per ton, almost 10 times as much labor. And you know, I've been also in the Nucor plant in Indiana, and that plant had an average income at the time of $48,000. This was way back. This was probably about 1987 or something like that. And they were making stainless steel that day with some guys sitting up in an office overlooking the mill, punching buttons, and it was all air conditioned, and they were making stainless steel very efficiently. So there's some companies that we have that they're not doing the right thing, and they may not survive, at least in the same scale. U.S. Steel does have some good outfits. Let me see now. Okay, but here's the number of public companies that we have. Like I say, we used to have a little more than 7,000, and now we have something like 3,500. So we've lost a lot of companies. And we also need to worry about where we're putting our money. You know, back in the 1990s, there were almost no stock buybacks. But you can see that the black one is dividends, the red one is stock buybacks, and the blue one is capital expenditures. And what we've been doing recently is we've been buying back a lot of the stocks. IBM, my old employer, they bought back something like $175 billion worth of IBM stock. And it's depleted their cash. IBM also now has negative net worth. When I worked there back in the 50s and 60s, our chief financial officer was from Brooklyn. And, you know, he was sort of challenged with respect to the King's English. But I'll tell you that nobody wasted any money. It was very frugal, very efficient, and they were in great shape financially. But then they started buying back this stock at a later age, and now IBM also, in addition to Boeing, has negative net worth. AT&T is another one. It's evolved into a rather poorly managed place with enormous amounts of debt. So that's not a good thing to do if you want to stay in business. Now here's, in terms of the environmental stuff, you know, you got planes emit a lot, SUVs, small cars, motorcycles. And I think we ought to dwell on this a little bit. Of course, if you go by boat, that's the most efficient thing to do. It's hard to do in all places. But here's a study that was done by MIT, not by Split Lip Nevada State College or something, but by MIT. And here they did a study of automobiles from the standpoint of the pollution that was emitted when the car was produced, like mining the materials, mining the mines in Indonesia that produce some of these key minerals are not pretty, nor are the ones in the Congo. But anyway, and then in use, and then they compared a Tesla Model S, a BMW 7 Series, one of their larger cars, and then the Mitsubishi Mirage, a very small car. And look at the, on the bottom one, the life cycle emissions per kilometer. And so we are trying to encourage electric vehicles. I'm not against them. The electric motor has great torque at low speeds. It's a good way of doing it. But here's the thing. We are not keeping track of where we stand on the materials that are needed to produce that car. And we are not at all keeping track of the amount of pollution that is developed in mining these materials that are needed. And so we just ought to think about some of that stuff. So I think, you know, the proposal to have a subsidy on electric cars, it's ill-timed. Sure, we don't want to have the pollution. It's very harmful. But here's the thing. You know, we're not, the electrical grid can't handle it. It's very marginal, especially in the East Coast, and probably also in California and Texas. So we got to do things in the right time frame. So anyway, here's another thing. Here's some of the, what I call the wildebeest stocks. These are the stocks that people, they think they're glamorous. They think there's going to be a lot of money made, and people flock to them. Things like AT&T, Airbnb, Uber, Amazon, Lyft, Wayfair, and then John Deere. I just have them as a comparison. Here's the amount of money that's been paid in. 131 billion, so on, so 75 billion. Wayfair isn't quite so much, but look at their tangible net worth. All that money was invested, and here's where they stand right now. So AT&T, for instance, has a negative tangible net worth of about $100 billion. And Uber is about -3. Lyft is down 50 million. Here's the retained earnings. Amazon has had a fair amount of earnings, but look at what they are currently. They're losing money, and I think they'll get it fixed. It's not a profitable company. And look at their PE, 289. We know that empirically, that the long-term average is around 17. And now let's compare to Deere. The $5 billion was put into Deere. It's now worth about $15.5 billion. They've paid out a lot of dividends. They have had $42 billion of retained earnings. They're going to make about $8 billion this year. Their share price is $411, but it's a 13.8 PE. Quite a difference. So, you know, we're wasting a certain amount of money by putting money into these hotshot stocks. This is a study that was done in one of the economic journals, and quite a long time ago. And these fellas, they studied tires for 76 years. My wife said she felt sorry for their poor wives. But anyway, they looked at tires, the number of tires produced. They went back to 1900 about, and then the prices of the tires and all that stuff. And here's what they found a very interesting thing: that the share prices of the tiring companies was not related to the number of tires produced, or the profitability, or the prices. It was related to the number of companies coming in and out of the business. And when tires first were in vogue back in the early 1900s, everybody thought everybody and their dog is going to make money in tires. And they flocked into the tire companies, made investments, and then that continued for a while until somebody figured out not everybody's going to make a lot of money in tires, maybe Goodyear and a few others, and people started to withdraw. At that time, then the tire prices declined. And that's happening in almost every industry. You know, Airbnb, you know, the Uber, Lyft type stuff. People think, well, that's going to be a gold mine, and they flock into it, and then a few years later, people figure out not everybody's going to make money in this business, and that's when the share prices decline. And some of those shares are in pension funds. Okay, here's another consideration: Bitcoin. And you know, it doesn't really add to anything. In fairness to Bitcoin, it may emerge because many of the sovereigns have mismanaged their currencies, as have we. So maybe that's an argument for it, but it takes a lot of electricity, as much as the Netherlands. As much or more electricity used in mining Bitcoin as in the whole country of the Netherlands. So that has its impact too. So the things we would like to do is we would like to accomplish nuclear fusions and then find substitutes for major minerals and chemicals. I think there's some potential there. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about fusion. And that is sort of a clean energy. But here's the thing, and it will look something like this. It's probably not going to be around until about 2060, if then. And it's not going to be cheap. Because there's some minor problems with it. First of all, it's very hard to achieve. And these plants that are the prototype plants, these are multi-billion-dollar investments for a dinky little plant. And it's exceedingly hot. It's thousands of degrees, what they call kelvins. A kelvin is 272 centigrade Celsius degrees. It's thousands of kelvins in temperature, very, very hot. It can vaporize tungsten in an instant. So if you get fusion, where do you put it? And so there's some things to work through. So I think a lot of the people that have been studying this sort of thing think, we're going to have to do some things in the interim before fusion gets here. And even when it gets here, it's not going to be a bed of roses, maybe. But it could theoretically be a good thing. So, in conclusion, here's what I think we need to do. We need to have a plentiful source of good materials or substitutes. We can accomplish a lot with substitutes, like Lockheed Martin did with their airplanes. There's a lot of other things we could do. We need an ample supply of good, productive people. We don't need more bureaucrats. And we need more well-run and financially solid investments. Companies like Deere are here in Minnesota. Pentair is pretty good, and Graco, and we've got some good companies here. And we do not need we do not need wasteful investments. We need good, solid investments. So, so our country has many pluses, but the ball game's going to get tougher. We're going to have a lot of competition, and we're going to have competition in terms of both numbers of people and the quality and education of those people. And so we're going to have to kind of get our act together here and maybe work a little more cooperatively. But anyway, that's what I had to say. I'll be happy to answer any questions if anybody needs.
We have questions. Eric?
Maybe one thing missing that I think is important. I worked in a startup company with, is it on? I worked in a startup company with 3 engineers, and in one of our planning meetings, one of the guys talked about how we needed the strategy to the beach. And afterwards I asked him, what are you talking about? These guys were about 15, 20 years younger than me. And he said, well, we hit it big and we retire at 50 and go to the beach. It seems to me it's not just having the well-educated people, it's the attitude that's important. I grew up with the idea, and certainly from my parents, that you work till you drop. And that's what a meaningful life was, producing. And if that attitude isn't there, if everybody's trying to make a quick killing and go to the beach, it doesn't end well.
I think that is very true. And we have a lot of education people in our family, different schools. And I've heard this, the teachers get burned out, and teaching is an important job. And there's some very good people in it. But I think some of the people that they claim to be burned out, I don't think they were ever ignited. Anything else that...
Could you just talk about the Northeast Minnesota and the controversy about the copper nickel and all that stuff?
That's, I think we have to approach these problems with a full set of information. Certainly, there is evidence that mining can be problematic to the environment. It doesn't always have to be like that. But, we're going to need these materials. And when we lived in Los Angeles for a while, my time in the computer business, and there were a bunch of oil refineries in the South Bay area. And there was another chemical process. One was Union Carbide, then Mobil Oil, then Shell, and then there was Atlantic Richfield. There was night and day difference between these different operations. Some were very messy. You know, Union Carbide was an absolute dump. There was liquid stuff laying around, all kinds of broken pipes. And then the Atlantic Richfield refinery was very, very neat. It was newly painted all the time. They had nice landscaping around it. It was spotless. And we got to be alert to these differences. One of the speakers that I had at class once, he was very interesting, was Archie Johnson. He was the executive vice president of Kimberly-Clark. And one of the students said, well, you know, how do you decide if you want to buy a company? And he said, well, he says, that's very interesting. I'll give you an example. We got word last week that there was a paper mill that was for sale in Alabama. And it was one of the largest mills in the United States. And I went down there to look at it. And I was not in that mill 15 minutes before I knew we would not buy it. So the student says, well, what made you decide that? He says, well, when I look at a paper mill, I go first to the parts room. We all know what parts you need to maintain a paper mill, and they weren't there. The place was in terrible repair, so we wouldn't buy it. You know, that's the kind of dimension that we should bring, I think, to the mining of northern Minnesota. It's very rich in materials, and we're going to need them. And we can run things responsibly. When I was a young field engineer in the Moline office of IBM for a while, and we had Deere, International Harvester, Case, and Minneapolis Moline all in that area, in that town. Moline, Rock Island, and Davenport. And so I was in all those plants. And so I was in an International Harvester plant. And I'd been in a Deere plant earlier that day. The Deere plants were all really well kept. The machinery was up to date. The employees were well trained. And they were a wonderful place to work. And the whole town knew it. I'll get down here in a minute. But they'd hire people on the basis of character traits. They wanted people who came to work on time, they didn't drink too much, and they saved money. Because Deere was formed in 1837, long before any kind of safety net. And so they had a good crew, and they were by far the preferred place to work. And the International Harvester plant was a wreck. And I worked on a machine. IBM made us wear suits. I got pretty dirty, and I asked if I could go to the men's room and wash up. I walked down the middle of the plant. There was all this junk in the middle of the plant, rusty old pieces of equipment. I walked up a mezzanine to a men's room. There was no light a 40-watt bulb in the men's room, and no towel, no soap. And the place was just a dump. The whole town knew it. And I walked out of that plant. At that time, International Harvester was 2.5 times the size of Deere. They had been 8 times the size of Deere in the 1930s. And I walked out and I thought to myself, there is no way that International Harvester is going to survive against Deere. And that's where we should approach the mining question in northeast Minnesota.
We have one last question here from Chuck.
You did touch on the role of labor unions. Wasn't Nucor Steel originated without a union and very aggressive employee profit sharing?
Actually, I think, I know Ken Iverson, the founder of Nucor, and I've met several of the other people. I think they had very good labor policies. They, many of the, they aren't really anti-union. They, I've known a lot of labor guys. I've known a lot of people that are not labor guys. It depends. We had Douglas Fraser, who was head of the United Auto Workers, come out and talk to St. Thomas. He was hired. He was head of the UAW when Chrysler went through all of its problems and needed loan guarantees and stuff. You know, Iacocca and Douglas Fraser were close friends and they worked well together. And I think that the labor union thing is, you know, the really good labor people, they know that they have to remain in business. I don't think we need the hostility that we sometimes assume is there. Because, Deere is unionized. Deere, this is interesting. In the 1980s, when a lot of things came apart, Deere, Alice Chalmers, International Harvester, Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, and Alice Chalmers, they were all UAW shops. And the cooperation was excellent at Ford, and it was excellent at Chrysler. It was lousy at General Motors. You know, I think that there is a video on the formation of Nucor, and the fact is that many of the people that did help build that company came from unionized companies where they got it all screwed up. And so, I think it's much more of a qualitative thing than a structural thing. So I don't know, Chuck, if that helps you out.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zimmerman.
Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zimmerman, and I know that he'll be hanging around here. You've got more questions for him. Bring it up. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, August 8th. We'll be looking at what Barb alluded to, the process for getting absentee ballots out and returned will be in our first hour, half hour. We will be announcing our featured speaker in the July 27th meeting announcement. We have somebody on deck that we think will be really good once we have him confirmed. We also expect to have time in the August meeting for our 2 cents for 2 minutes segment. So be thinking of what you want to say in 2 minutes or less. On each table, there should be, I have an idea forms. If they're not there, we'll get them out to you next meeting too. We want to have a place for you to tell us what speakers you want to hear, what topics you want to hear. If you have ideas for getting to know each other during these meetings, we want seniors to feel comfortable and confident as they speak about politics and issues with their friends. Now, we have our door prize drawing. If you have ticket 317193, I have. Oh, Al, you're not allowed to pick your own. Yeah, no. How about 317170? 170, you're here? Okay, come on up. I have a door prize for you. And I picked this one. 317180. Okay. Happy that we have 2 winners of our door prizes, coffee cards, and we'll see you on August 8th. Thank you so much, everyone.
In my America,
in my America,
in my America,
in my America, I am free.
In my America, I get to choose my leaders.
In my America, we the people is a colorless phrase.
In my America, I am free.
Oh, say, can you see
In my America, any one of my daughters can be a soldier, a doctor, and a mother.
In my America, freedom of speech doesn't exclude Christianity, it's rooted in it.
In my America, family comes first.
In my America, I can own my own business.
In my America, we honor our troops and their sacrifices.
In my America, one nation is followed by under God.
In my America, fireworks remind me of the gift of freedom.
In my America, I am free.
In my America, I can worship freely.
In my America, the founding fathers used the Bible to guide their pen.
在我美国，我有自由。
In my America, you can snowboard wherever you want to, even at the mall.
In my America, Charlton Heston is a hero.
In my America, I can raise my children in the nurture and admonition of my faith.
In my America, freedom takes action.
Republican Seniors of Minnesota. We bring seniors 50 plus together.
Learn about and discuss issues that are important to Minnesotans. Hear from our elected officials and experts on public policy.
Meet political candidates, elect delegates to district and state conventions, and help elect Republicans to office at all levels.
We believe in and advocate for the principles of personal responsibility, economic prosperity, peace through strong national defense,
and limited, sensible government. Republican Seniors of Minnesota. Thanks for joining us.
For more information, please visit republicanseniorsmn.com. While visiting our website, you can click on the video tab to watch videos of past meetings. Also, look for other tabs that bring you to our live player and other special video programs. Or on YouTube, search for Republican Seniors of Minnesota.